Yeah.
Imagine trying to preserve the memory of a massacre, right?
Yeah.
But the people who committed the atrocity are the exact same people writing the official history books.
Yeah, that's a tough spot. You don't have printing presses or, friendly state historians to help you out.
Exactly. The empire has already buried the bodies, and they're like already spinning the narrative to make themselves the heroes.
Which is such a common playbook in history, honestly.
Right. So all you have is your voice, an angry, grieving crowd, and the rhythm of poetry. Today, we are looking at a tradition that used exactly those tools to just utterly defeat an empire's propaganda.
It is a phenomenal mechanism of survival, really. I mean, you are looking at a scenario where state-sponsored historical erasure was met with this impenetrable wall of communal mourning.
And the morning one.
It totally did.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us because today's mission is all about tracing an incredibly powerful historical lifeline. We are examining a piece of literature called Azan-E-Majlis. It's a collection of Urdu poetry authored by Adeel Zaidi, and it was published around October 2008.
Right, a fairly modern text.
Yeah. But, okay, let's unpack this, because we aren't just doing some basic literary critique of a modern poetry book today.
No, definitely not.
Our objective is to highlight the historical origins of the Azan-E-Majlis tradition itself. We want to understand how a book published in the 21st century by an author living in the West, mind you, draws its spiritual, structural, and historical roots directly back to the 7th century.
Specifically to the tragic aftermath of the Battle of Karbala.
Exactly.
Well, to really grasp the gravity of this text, you have to look at the visual and conceptual universe it establishes right away.
Oh yeah, the cover art is striking.
It really is. On the cover and within those opening pages, you are just pulled completely out of the modern world. Like, you aren't in a library or a bookstore. You are placed in this stylized, kind of timeless courtyard. There is a pulpit, a minbar right in the center, shrines loom in the background, and there's a gathering of people.
So it's very atmospheric.
Yes, but it isn't just aesthetic. It's actually a map of communal memory. The text is showing us that this specific history isn't preserved through cold academic facts, It's kept alive through rhythm, rhyme, and a profoundly shared multi-generational grief.
And that visual of the courtyard perfectly sets up the title itself, Azan-E-Majlis.
Right.
If you break that down, it essentially translates to the call of the gathering. And the author doesn't leave the meaning of this title up to interpretation at all.
He's very explicit about it.
Yeah. Right in the titular verses, he drops some incredibly heavy definitions. He writes, Ataya ya ale baserat Azan-E-Majlis hai, which means it is a gift for the people of insight. But then he goes a step further and calls it Bakeri din ki zamanat, the guarantee of the survival of the faith.
What's fascinating here is the sheer audacity of that claim. I mean, the text is not saying this poetry is just a nice cultural artifact. It is claiming to be the foundational pillar, keeping the entire belief system from collapsing under the weight of time.
I have to admit, when I first read that, I tripped over it a bit.
How so?
Well, a book of poems guaranteeing the survival of the faith. It feels like a massive, almost, hyperbolic claim.
Sure, it sounds huge to a modern ear.
Yeah. But then I start thinking about the word azan. Like in the Islamic tradition, the traditional azan is a physical, literal call to prayer.
Right, it rings out from a minaret.
Exactly. To alert your physical body that the sun has moved, time has passed, and you need to pray. But reading this text, it feels like the Azan-E-Majlis operates on an entirely different frequency.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
If the traditional azan calls the body to a mosque, this poetry is like an emotional call, alerting the soul that it's time to remember. It's calling you to step into history.
That is exactly the distinction the text is drawing. The poetry aggressively frames the Majlis, the gathering itself, as a deliberate mechanism of historical survival.
It's not just a book club.
Far from it. It refuses to be categorized as a modern invention. The text explicitly refers to the tradition as Nabi Kegar ki inayat, a blessing or a gift directly from the house of the prophet.
Wow.
Yeah, it posits that without this specific institution of gathering and reciting, the core values of the faith would have just been eroded by time and political corruption.
Which drives us straight into the heart of what we are unpacking today, the origin point.
Right.
Because if this gathering is a survival mechanism, who built it? Like, when did it actually start?
And the text points to a very specific moment in the 7th century for that.
Yeah, there was a line in the poetry that is arguably the anchor for this entire deep dive. Adeel Zaidi writes, Saringi Zainabi Khutbonse Arahi Hai Adeel.
which translates to this call is coming from the sermons of Zainab.
Yes, that single line just bridges a 1,400-year gap. It connects a poet in 2008 directly to the immediate aftermath of the Karbala tragedy.
And to understand why her sermons are the origin point, you really have to look at the severe political reality of the year 680 AD.
Right, because Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, alongside his family and companions, had just been massacred by the ruling Umayyad forces on the plains of Karbala.
It was an absolute bloodbath.
And historically speaking, when an empire wipes out a perceived threat, the violence doesn't just stop on the battlefield.
No, the next phase is always narrative control.
Exactly. The Umayyads needed to frame Hussein as a rebel, a traitor who disrupted the peace of the empire. They needed the public to believe the massacre was just, justified state security.
Right, and the Umayyad propaganda machine was vast and well-funded. I mean, they paraded the surviving members of Hussein's family, mostly women and children, including his sister, Hazrat Zainab, in chains across the desert,
Just awful.
all the way to the courts of Kufa and Damascus. The empire's goal was public humiliation. They wanted to display these captives as defeated rebels to solidify their own absolute power.
But the text suggests that plan spectacularly backfired, and specifically because of Zainab.
Oh, completely.
She didn't play the role of the defeated captive at all. She stood in those courts, heavily guarded, facing the very rulers who ordered the slaughter of her family, and she delivered these fiercely eloquent sermons. The khutbahs.
And we cannot overstate the danger of what she did there.
I mean, speaking truth to power while in chains.
Exactly. She used the public spectacle that was designed to humiliate her as a platform to dismantle the empire's narrative in real time.
Oh.
She laid bare the injustice, documented the tragedy verbally, and forced the public to witness the truth of what had been done to the Prophet's own family. She shattered the state-sanctioned history before the ink could even dry.
I was trying to wrap my head around how a modern poem functions as a continuation of those specific sermons. And I realized it's a lot like an acoustic resonance.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like if you stand in a massive ancient cavern and shout, the sound wave bounces off the stone, it vibrates, and if the conditions are right, that wave doesn't stop, it just keeps traveling. Zainab's voice in Damascus was a sound wave of absolute defiance against tyranny. And what Adeel Zaidi is suggesting here is that his pen is just catching that exact same vibration.
Yes.
He isn't writing about her. He is acting as a modern acoustic chamber for her original voice.
That is precisely the mechanism the source material is highlighting. There is another profound line that backs up your resonance theory perfectly.
What's the line?
Zindagi shabirat ki joidan Zainab se hai. Meaning, the eternal life of Hussein's legacy is through Zainab.
Wow.
Without her speaking out, the tragedy might have been successfully buried under imperial propaganda. Therefore, every single Majlis, every gathering of mourning today, is fundamentally a reenactment of her original defiance.
It totally reframes what it means to mourn, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's not just about feeling sad. It's an act of historical resistance. Like, if you stop mourning, the empire finally wins. The erasure is complete.
Exactly.
Which naturally makes me wonder about the people showing up to these gatherings today. If the origin of this call is rooted in 7th century defiance, how is the author convincing people in the 21st century to actually participate?
Well, throughout the book, there is this hypnotic refrain, Malison main I.
Come to the gatherings.
Right. And he provides a deeply compelling, poetic syllabus for why a person should attend. It's not a generic invitation.
No, the language is incredibly vivid. He writes that you should come magafarke fool tuna to pick the flowers of forgiveness. He invites you on Sawankar Brunei to weave garlands of tears. And crucially, Dine Persa Fatimako, to offer condolences to Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet and the mother of Hussein.
Notice the active verbs there.
Weaving.
Yes, weaving garlands of tears. It suggests that the grief experienced in these gatherings isn't chaotic or passive. You aren't just breaking down. A garland is crafted.
Right, it takes work.
It requires intentionality. The tears are precious materials being deliberately woven together to honor and preserve a legacy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because amidst these beautiful metaphors about flowers and garlands, the author drops a theological claim that legitimately stopped me in my tracks.
I think I know the one.
He writes, Masadi Kalakat Hamara Hai Aza Shibirki. To translate that, The purpose of our creation is the mourning of Hussein.
It's a massive statement.
It really is. Now, I have to push back on this a little for our listeners because that feels astronomically huge.
Sure.
It elevates a historical event, even a profoundly unjust one, into the literal reason for human existence.
Right.
How does a community justify making the act of crying for a historical figure the foundational purpose of why we are even born? Isn't there a risk of losing the broader moral lessons of the religion if you hyper-focus entirely on grief?
That is the exact friction the text wants you to engage with.
Really?
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text is introducing what we might call a pedagogy of grief.
A pedagogy of grief. Okay.
To the outsider, it looks like a hyper-focus on sadness. But within the tradition, mourning Hussein isn't just about shedding tears for a man who died. It is seen as the ultimate educational tool for the human soul.
Explain how that works in practice. Like, how does crying teach you anything?
Well, think about how human beings actually internalize values. You can read a theological textbook about the concept of justice or truth. You can memorize definitions.
Start cognitive learning.
Exactly. But cognitive understanding is often weak when it's tested by real-world pressure. However, when you sit in a gathering and actively weep over the brutal slaughter of someone who stood for justice, you aren't just learning about the concept.
What are you doing then?
You are emotionally traumatizing yourself with the consequence of injustice. Empathy becomes the teacher. The grief bypasses the intellect and embeds the moral lesson directly into the heart.
Oh, I see. So the argument is that you learn the deepest truths of the faith, not by reading a list of rules, but by intensely feeling the pain of Hussein's sacrifice. The grief acts as a conduit for the theology.
Exactly. The text explicitly mentions the desire to understand the soul of the religion, using phrases like Ruh Quran ko samajhne to understand the soul of the Quran.
Right.
The Azan-E-Majlis claims that you cannot truly understand that spiritual core unless your heart has been broken by Karbala. That is why mourning is elevated to the purpose of creation. It is the mechanism through which humanity achieves its highest moral empathy.
That completely changes the context of the invitation Dine persa Fatima ko, offering condolences to Fatima.
It really does.
Because when the poetry commands a listener today to offer condolences to a mother who lived 1,400 years ago, it's actively collapsing time.
Yes. The psychological barrier of time is entirely erased in the Majlis. The devotees aren't viewing history across a vast canyon.
They're right there.
They believe that Fatima is spiritually present to receive their grief. The 7th century and the 21st century occupy the exact same emotional space. The timeline is flattened, making the stance against tyranny an active daily ingredient in their lives, rather than just a passive footnote.
Which brings us to the actual physical vehicle carrying this massive theological weight. The book itself, Azan-E-Majlis.
Right.
We've talked about the 7th century roots of the timeless psychology of grief, but the text we are studying has a distinctly modern footprint.
It does.
In the forewords and reviews included in the source material, we see how global this tradition has really become. For instance, the renowned poet Qasim ibn Nasim notes that he met the author, Adeel Zaidi, in Houston, Texas.
In 2006, yeah.
Right, Houston.
It is a profound juxtaposition. You have a tradition born in the bloody sands of 7th century Iraq resonating in a modern American metropolis.
And there is a review in the text by Dr. Syed Shabi ul Hassan that captures this perfectly. He calls the work a Kadeen or Jadid ka Intizaj.
Which translates to a blend of the old and the new.
Exactly. But when I looked at the actual structure of the poetry, I was initially confused.
Why is that?
Well, if you were a modern author in Houston, why not write free verse? Why not write a modern essay? Why use these incredibly strict ancient classical forms?
Because it is very rigid.
Extremely.
Right.
It uses katas, which are highly specific four-line stanzas. It uses nanats to praise the prophet, mankabats for devotion to figures like Ali and Abbas, and salams for poetic salutations. These aren't just stylistic choices. They are mathematically precise poetic architectures.
And that structural rigidity is precisely how the history survives. You have to think of classical poetic forms not as an aesthetic choice, but as an operating system.
An operating system. Oh, I like that. Unpack that for me.
Well, if you write a historical account in prose or free verse, it is very easy for a hostile state like the Umayyads to alter a paragraph, delete a sentence, or change the context over centuries, right?
Just edit the book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But classical Urdu poetry relies on strict meter, rhythm, and specific rhyme schemes. If you remove or alter a single word in a kata, the entire rhythm breaks.
Oh, it becomes super obvious it was tampered with.
Exactly. The mathematical structure acts as a form of encryption. It protects the historical data.
Wow. So the rhythm isn't just to make it sound pretty, it's a security feature.
It's totally a security feature.
Mm.
And furthermore, human memory is fundamentally wired for rhythm.
That's true.
I mean, you can remember the lyrics to a song you haven't heard in 20 years, but you can't remember a paragraph from a textbook you read yesterday.
Guilt is charged.
Right. By taking the immense historical trauma of Karbala and forcing it into the strict rhythmic confines of a kata or a salam, the poet is creating a highly memorizable, indestructible capsule of memory.
So when Dr. Hassan calls it a blend of the old and the new, he means the operating system. The strict poetic structure is ancient.
Yes.
The core data, the tragedy of Karbala, is ancient.
Exactly.
But the software developer writing the code, the poet Adeel Zaidi sitting in Houston,
No.
is entirely contemporary.
Beautifully put.
The genius of the Azan-E-Majlis tradition is that you can run this ancient operating system anywhere in the world, in any century, and it will faithfully reproduce the exact same acoustic resonance of Zainab's original sermon.
Precisely. The medium ensures the continuity of the historical bloodline. It proves that the call of the gathering is immune to geography and immune to time.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Mm-hmm.
We set out today to track the historical origins of the Azan-E-Majlis tradition through Adeel Zaidi's poetry. And what we found is a staggering testament to human endurance.
Absolutely staggering.
We started with the threat of total historical erasure in the 7th century. We witnessed how Hazrat Zainab's defiant sermons in the courts of her captors shattered an empire's propaganda, effectively initiating the very first Majlis.
The original call.
Right. And we explored the incredible pedagogy of grief, the idea that humanity learns its highest moral truths, not just through reading, but through the intentional, community-driven act of weaving garlands of tears.
Empathy as the ultimate teacher.
And finally, we saw how the strict, ancient mechanics of classical poetry serve as an unbreakable vessel, allowing a poet in 21st century America to seamlessly channel the defiance of antiquity. History, as it turns out, doesn't need a climate-controlled archive to survive.
No, it really doesn't.
For the Ali Baysarat, the people of inside history breathes, lives, and fiercely defends itself through the rhythmic verses of shared grief.
It really forces us to completely reevaluate our modern assumptions about what constitutes a durable record.
Yeah, how so?
Well, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. We live in an era where we outsource our memories to hard drives, cloud servers, and data centers.
Right, everything is in the cloud.
And we operate under the assumption that digital storage is the ultimate form of preservation. But consider the sheer, undeniable durability of the oral and poetic tradition we explored today.
It's lasted 1,400 years.
Exactly. If a single passionate sermon from a captive woman in the 7th century can echo loudly enough and be structured perfectly enough to inspire entire volumes of poetry across the globe over a millennia later,
Yeah.
what modern voices or modern mechanisms of memory do we possess today that could possibly carry that same eternal resonance?
That's a powerful question. The digital footprint might seem permanent, but when you step into the profound depths of communal memory, you realize that the most indestructible archive on Earth is still the human heart.